Hello, my name is Robin McHaelen. I'm the Executive Director of True Colors. It's an organization that does education and advocacy for gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, questioning, two-spirit, same gender loving, pansexual, flexual, not straight, not labeling, straightish, straight so far, straight with options, straight but stuff happens, gender bending, bigender, pangender, agender, asexual, non-binary, and other sexual and gender minority youth. I always start these conversations with the litany of the language, not because I have any expectation that you'll remember all of that, but really to make 2 points. One is that the language is changing and how young people in particular, but people in general, are describing themselves and their experiences may be very different than many of us grew up with. Fortunately, we don't have to keep up. We just have to keep open. I would say that there's a basic set of information that people need to have, but beyond that, we don't have to keep up with all the language and all the different changing identities. All we have to do is keep open and be able to accept and respect any of the identities that people share with us. So I'm gonna bring in a PowerPoint at this point, just so that we can walk through some of the basic information together. So hold on 1 second while I share my screen. All right, great. So as I said, my name is Robin McHaelen. I'm current executive director of True Colors. The information about True Colors is there. There may also be, just to give you a little bit of a history of what we do. True Colors works to create a world where LGBTQ plus youth thrive. We work to ensure that LGBTQ plus youth of all backgrounds are safe, valued, and able to be their authentic selves. We have a number of programs. We have LGBTQ plus mentoring. All of the young people in our mentoring program are under the auspices of the Department of Children and Families in some area, some level or another. Many have been rejected by their families of origin on the basis of their orientation or their sexual orientation or gender identity and expression. And we're always looking for mentors all over the state of Connecticut. We run an annual LGBTQ plus and ally youth issues conference. It's the largest one in the country. This year we went online with that obviously because of the pandemic. And we're in the middle of running our 6-week mini-con series, which is every Friday until the end of June on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. You can get more information about that on our website. We do youth leadership development. We train thousands of helping professionals, educators every year. And we recruit foster parents for teenagers in particular. I never go anywhere without saying that at any moment in time in Connecticut, there's about 75 teenagers that are in a restricted level of care, not because they need to be there, but because there are no families that are willing to take in adolescents. So just, drop the seed. If you have room in your home and your heart, or you know somebody who does, there's always a young person that's looking for a family to love them. For more information about who we are and what we do, you can check out our website at ourtruecolors.org. I want to, set the foundation, and I said this already when I started with the litany of the language, but I think it bears repeating. You don't have to keep up. In fact, we can't keep up. The language changes all the time. We just have to keep open. So when a young person, and I sort of make this a habit with me, I often ask young people how they identify. I don't ask grown-ups because grown-ups get all cranky about it, but I often ask young people. And then no matter what they say, I often will say something like, oh, that's interesting. I haven't heard that before. Or, oh, pansexual, tell me more about what that means for you. So even if you've heard the word before, you don't necessarily know what it means for them. So the idea of staying open is really what we need to do. The second thing is, we don't necessarily have to understand. In fact, I would suggest that if we're talking about an identity that you don't have, whatever that identity might be, it's impossible to fully understand what it means to walk in that person's experience in the world. So we don't necessarily have to understand. We don't even have to necessarily approve. We do have to accept and respect. And I think those are the two foundations for being an ally: accepting and respecting, keeping open. Some of the questions that we're going to consider as we go through today's conversation, and these are things that you might want to be thinking about as you hear, as we continue through today. What are the ways that you as an individual can become a human safe zone? What might your school, agency, company, or congregation do to let the LGBTQ plus community know that you welcome and value them? And then how do you make these concepts real in your work and your day-to-day life? What 2 or 3 things will you put into action? I think, you know, the subtext, the subtitle of this presentation, it's an LGBTQ plus 101, but the subtitle is "To Ally is a Verb." And these are the questions we need to consider as we're figuring out how we can be an ally for a person, an individual, or a group who has an identity that we don't share. So I always, if we were doing this in person, I would be asking you these questions in person. And so I'm going to ask you to think about how you would answer these questions for yourself. The first thing is your name, as you would like to be addressed. So what do you want people to call you? Some people like shortened versions of their names. Some people don't like their first name and they like their middle name. Some people love their name and they want you to say it right and pronounce it correctly. Some people, the name that's on their birth certificate has nothing whatsoever to do with who they are as a person. So asking someone their name as they would like to be addressed or how they like to be, what they would like to be called, gives everybody the option right from the beginning to be able to say, here's how I would like you to address me. Here's how I want to be known. Here's who I am. I'm also going to ask you to be able to answer the question of your pronoun. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. What are yours? I'm going to show you a video in a second about pronouns and why they matter so much. But consider, you know, the pronouns that we use are things that we've thought about. If your gender fits you comfortably, then chances are you haven't thought about pronouns since you learned about them in 3rd grade. If the sex that you were assigned at birth doesn't match how you identify, pronouns can be really a core issue for folks. Like, they're part of how I identify and how people see me in the world. And that if people use the wrong pronouns for me, then they're demonstrating actively that they're not seeing me. And so we're going to spend a little time a little bit later practicing and thinking about how do you incorporate your pronouns into a conversation with people. And then think for yourself about a goal for today's conversation. What do you want to make sure that you get out of this? I'll tell you, we're going to cover definitions. We're going to cover some ways that you can ally as an individual. We're going to cover some ways that your organization or the group that you're a part of, that you're watching this through, how they might act as an ally. And then be thinking as you go through this, so what for you? How are you going to make the information that you hear and talk about real and active in your life? So let's take a quick look at a video that talks about pronouns and why they matter.
I go back to my how it's been for my pronouns. Sometimes people at the work that present as recently so I like to be referred to around 1% feels good to work. Pronouns are important because the you really put thought into whether or not somebody, there's a lot of situations that we just don't need necessarily black gender. Yeah, I'm sure that's what these pronouns are put aside and ask, you know, hey, what are your pronouns? If something with preferred pronoun, because it's acceptable to black, it's acceptable to white. Mistakes, but you're going to still be down regardless of whether or not it's an act of disrespect. Everybody else in the world out there can say, I have sex. I said, I know.
So that was a short video about why, for some folks, why their experience of why pronouns matter. I invite you to consider exactly what Kate Bornstein said in the end. Misgendering someone is really an act of disrespect. And I would also say that we're human, that we're gonna make mistakes. And if we make a mistake, that what we do then is we catch ourselves. That's the first most important thing. So recognize that you made a mistake, correct yourself, apologize, and move on. And like anything, most people are forgiving when people who are genuinely trying make a mistake. But I wonder if you or somebody you know has had their name mispronounced. I know I certainly have. And then how many people have had their name mispronounced multiple times by the same person? When the same person gets your name wrong over and over and over again, it becomes clear that the message is that they don't care enough to get it right, and names matter. It's the same thing with pronouns. You can make mistakes, especially if you've known somebody in a certain way, and then it's become clear that that's not who they are, and the pronouns that you use for them change. It can take a while to get used to it. So we're gonna make mistakes. Notice, correct yourself, and move on, and then recognize that if you don't get it after a while, it's because the person at least is gonna experience that as you don't get it because you don't care enough to get it. I want to spend a little bit of time, not a lot, but a little bit of time doing some quick set of definitions so that we're all on the same page and we know what we're talking about. This is my little genderbread person. And, understand with the genderbread person that I'm going to give you one way of thinking about gender. It kind of simplifies it, but it gives us a foundation for thinking about some of these concepts. So the first element of gender is really gender expression. The reason that's the first element is because it's the first thing that we see. When you look at somebody, the first thing that you see is their outsides, right? And we make all kinds of assumptions about people based on what they look like. We make assumptions about race, about ethnicity, about age, and certainly we make assumptions about gender. And in fact, when people walk into a room, they instantaneously gender everyone in the room. At least they make an assumption about what gender that person is based on how they look. And the messages about gender expression start really early. They did a study years ago with hospital nurses where they randomly put blue and pink hats on newborns, and then they filmed the nurses. And what they found was that if it was a blue-hatted baby, the nurses let it cry longer before they picked it up. And then if it was a pink-hatted baby, not only did they pick it up sooner, but they comforted it like this, whereas the blue-hatted baby, they comforted like this, right? So clearly their decision on how to comfort that infant had nothing whatsoever to do with the actual gender of the infant. It had to do with what they were told and taught boys are like and girls are like, what boys need and what girls need. And so there's all these assumptions about who people are and how they're supposed to behave based on what the world sees when it looks at us. when I was little, another piece of research I think is really interesting is that the research says that if you look at somebody and you can't instantaneously tell if you're looking at a man or a woman, and that's very binary, but a man or a woman, we start with the presumption that the person that we're looking at is a man. And then we look for feminine overriders. And it takes as many as 3 feminine overriders to override the presumption that the person is male. When I was little, especially before puberty, that lots of people gendered me as a boy, right? In kindergarten, first grade, people often said little boy, young man. Obviously, I just didn't have enough feminine overriders. And every time that happened, I felt embarrassed, but I never thought I was a boy. That's the difference between gender expression, which is what the world saw when it looked at me, and gender identity, which is who I knew myself to be, right? I knew I was a girl, even though the world didn't see it. So gender identity is who you know yourself to be inside as a gendered being. And that might be as a boy, as a girl, something more or different than that at all. So gender expression, what the world sees when it looks at us. Gender identity, who we know ourselves to be. Sex is what's assigned at birth. And what they do at birth is they look at your genitals, and if they look the way they expect them to look, they assign a sex and off you go. And it's interesting that at that biological level, things are not quite as clear-cut as everybody pretends that they are. That we now know that intersex children, babies that are born with chromosomal, reproductive, or genital differences are as common as red hair, right? About 1 in every 2,000 births. So even at the level of biology, gender is so much more complicated and fluid than simply this or simply that. So gender expression, what the world sees when it looks at us and what it uses to make assumptions about who we are. Gender identity is who we are, and the sex is what's assigned at birth. When all 3 of those things match, when the sex you're assigned at birth matches how you identify and generally matches how the world sees you, that's called cisgender, C-I-S, gender. That prefix, C-I-S, means matching or on the same side as. I am a cisgender woman. So when they looked at me at birth, they said, that's a girl. I identify as a woman, and the world now generally sees me as a woman. So cisgender is when the sex you were assigned at birth matches who you are, right? Transgender is when the sex you were assigned at birth does not match who you are. And as many millions of different ways there are to be cisgender, there's just as many millions of ways to be transgender. That you're not more or less transgender because of choices that you make about gender expression, choices that you make about how you identify, what, if any, medical interventions you choose. None of that is what makes someone transgender. They're transgender because the sex they were assigned at birth doesn't match who they are. Just quite that simple. And then we also need to really pay attention to the concept of non-binary. Back in 2012, HRC, which is the Human Rights Foundation, did a survey, and there were about 10,000 young people between the ages of 13 and 17 in that survey, all of whom identified somewhere on the LGBT spectrum. So in 2012, a little bit less than 10% of the young people who answered that survey said that they identified as neither male nor female. The most common term in 2012 was genderqueer. They redid the survey in 2017. This time, over 12,000 young people between 13 and 17 who identified on the LGBTQ plus spectrum answered the survey, and 34% identified as neither male nor female. The most common term in 2017 was non-binary. And interestingly, with non-binary, sometimes we think that this is a new concept, but it is not at all a new concept historically. History is full of examples of gender diversity. And when you look at history and the definitions of gender across the centuries, prior to colonization, and around the 13th century, virtually every indigenous society in the world had people who identified with more than one gender, or who had in their language 3 or more genders, sometimes as many as 5 or 6. That the recognition that it's not simply this and simply this is very old and very common in lots of different cultures and societies. And it was the imposition of European culture which sort of socialized out the concept of this fluidity and this diversity of gender. The reality is that people can be men, women, both, neither, or something else. Everybody gets to describe their gender in their own words. And remember, you don't have to keep up. You don't have to understand or even necessarily approve. You just have to accept and respect. There's a video on the screen that I'm not going to show that you can check out on your own. It's on YouTube. It's called Coming Out as Non-Binary. It's really a wonderful video of a bunch of different people's experiences of non-binary. And I think one of the reasons that videos are useful is that the single most effective form of prejudice or bias reduction, regardless of what you're talking about, is face-to-face interactions over a period of time. We found that over the last 25 years, the number of people who personally know somebody who's gay, lesbian, bi, or pan has risen exponentially. And as a result, more than half of the country supports equal rights for around sexual orientation. It supports non-discrimination, supports marriage equality. That in the last 10 years is really a sea change. And a lot of that has to do with obviously the activism of people who made that happen, but also people began to know more and more gay, lesbian, bi, and pan people. And that begins to break down the myths and the stereotypes that they grew up hearing about who we are. More people are beginning to know trans folks, sort of binary trans folks, but fewer people have experience with non-binary folks. And so we tend to use what we see out in the media or what we see, out in the world as the barometer of who people are, and then sort of generalize that to people as a whole. Using YouTube videos and other forms of getting information is a way of expanding our knowledge of who people are, but also breaking down the stereotypes and the myths that we grew up with that got assigned to people's identity as a sexual or a gender minority. So, check out those videos. It's a great thing to do to keep your learning and development growing. So, gender identity, gender's made up of gender expression, gender identity, and also the sex that you're assigned at birth. Some people sort of conflate gender identity with sexual orientation, but sexual orientation is about your attractions. It's about the genders to which one is romantically and erotically attracted. You can be attracted to a single gender, i.e. gay or straight. You can be attracted to more than one gender, bisexual, pansexual, fluid. You can be attracted to no genders. You can be a person who doesn't have sexual or romantic attractions. And among young people, that is one of the fastest growing identities. Within asexuality, there's lots of permutations and gradations of how people identify romantically, how they identify erotically, and so on. So again, you don't have to keep up, but when someone says, I'm a demisexual, pansexual, non-binary person, you can say, great, what name do you want me to use? What pronouns? And by the way, tell me a little more about what that means for you, right? You don't have to keep up, just have to keep open. So I'm taking you through a quick visualization about sexual orientation, just so people can really get a sense of what we're talking about here. So I want you to close your eyes. I won't be able to tell because, I can't see you. Close your eyes and think about someone in your life to whom you have been extremely attracted. Okay. Got that person in your head? Okay. Now, picture that person is walking in the door. and you are making eye contact with that person, and you know that that person wants exactly the same things that you want, right? And you are getting closer and closer and closer, and you're making this intense eye contact, and there is nobody in the world except you two. And now you're right about here. What's going on in your body in that moment of significant attraction? You don't have to be specific, but think about it, right? What's going on in people's bodies in that moment of significant attraction is that their heart rate is going up, right? Their face is getting flushed. Maybe their palms or other parts are getting sweaty. Their eyes are dilating, right? Their breathing gets faster. All of those things are happening in your body. Now ask yourself, which of the things that are happening in your body did you choose? I'll give you a second to think about that. And I betcha the answer is none of them, because we don't choose our feelings. We have our feelings, and then we choose to act on them or not act on them. So sexual orientation, and the reason I bring it up like this is that a lot of times I hear from adults or parents talking about their children, I wish my kid made a different choice. People don't have a choice about their feelings. They have their feelings. And then the choice that they have is what happens next. Because you could get to this moment and say, oh, wait, I am married and monogamous. Nothing's happening here. Or wait, now's not the right time. Or wait, I don't want to have these feelings with you right now. Bye-bye. Right? So people can make all kinds of choices to act on their feelings or not act on their feelings, to be authentic to their feelings over a period of time, or to not be authentic to their feelings over a period of time, but they don't have a choice about their feelings. And I think that that's really an important piece to think about. Your child or the person that you're working, they didn't choose to be who they are who they are. And it's our job to accept and respect that. Somebody once told me, and I thought this was really useful, that sexual orientation is about who you want to go to bed with. Gender identity is who you go to bed as, right? And that those are important to keep those two concepts separate or distinguished, and to recognize that every human being has a sexual orientation, right? You're either not attracted to anybody, you're attracted to one gender, you can be attracted to multiple genders, your attractions can change over time. And everybody has a gender identity. Everybody has it, whether it's male, female, non-binary, neither, both, and everybody has both of those things. And knowing who someone's attracted to doesn't necessarily tell you anything about their gender. And knowing someone's gender doesn't tell you anything about who they're attracted to. So they're related concepts, but they're different. Okay. All right. So hopefully that answers, puts us all on the same page, at least in terms of the definitions. And again, this is one way of thinking about things. There might be others, but at least this is a way of sort of setting us all on the same sort of basic foundation. Now we're going to think about allying and ally behavior and talking about being an ally as a verb, right? So some people, another organization asked me to do this for them, and so I thought this was useful, and so we're going to go over some basic do's and don'ts. Most of these will be self-evident, and many of them we've talked about already, but let's just go through them. Basic do's. Do share your pronoun when meeting new people and ask for theirs. Right? So I often introduce myself to people as, hi, I'm Robin. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Who are you? Right? So sharing your pronouns, and if you get in the habit of sharing your pronouns, then it doesn't feel weird to do it. Somebody once said in a video that I watched one time, a young person said, if you don't know somebody's pronoun, just ask. I think we should ask everybody, and this is my own personal opinion. And the reason I think that we should ask everybody is that if we're only asking the people that we wonder about, then we're probably using some sort of a stereotype to make an assumption about gender. If we ask everybody, we're not making any assumptions at all. We're not assuming that what we're seeing is who the person identifies as. And so, you know, that's my opinion, that we should be asking each other, sharing our pronouns and offering the opportunity for someone to share their own. Use people's chosen name and pronoun. If somebody tells you who they are, accept and respect and use that. It matters. It matters a lot. Ask if you're not sure. And if you're not sure, you know, like, again, I just said, ask if you ask everybody, that you can also, if you're not sure and you don't feel like you're in a position where you can ask, just use the person's name. That would prevent you from making mistakes. If you have to use a pronoun for some reason instead of their name, then some people suggest that it's helpful to default to they, them, and theirs, because it's less uncomfortable to be misgendered as a they than to be misgendered as a he or a she, because those are such rigid concepts. Try to use ungendered language in your conversations with people. You know, I can't tell you how many times over my life someone have asked me if I'm married, and I've said yes, and they say, well, what does your husband do? And I say, you know, my wife has an at-home business, right? Or whatever, you know, when she used to work at DCF or whatever, that they put me in a position by asking me what my husband does. They put me in a position of having to disabuse them of an assumption that they made in order to be authentic and to not be dishonest. And so, you know, using language like, are you in a relationship? Or, you know, what'd you do this week? What'd you do this weekend? Not to make assumptions about the gender or orientation of the people that you're interacting with. And I think probably the single most important thing that you could do is, when you hear mean, intervene. Every single time, no matter who says it, no matter how they say it. That, you know, you might be at Thanksgiving dinner and somebody, you know, a relative says something that everybody knows that that's just how they are. But, you know, biases are passed from generation to generation. And when we make a choice to not say something, we have said something. We've said what just happened was okay with us. So think about that dinner that you're having with generations of people, and, you know, this relative says something and you don't say something. The young people, the children in that space just heard, oh, it's okay to talk like that. It's okay to have those opinions and those feelings. Doesn't mean you have to be hostile. Doesn't mean you have to be mean yourself, but you can say, I have a different opinion, or I don't feel the same way, or I'm sorry, that word offends me, or ouch. You know, that I usually recommend to people that you have 4 or 5 phrases in your back pocket that you can pull out on the fly when somebody says something that's offensive, that you can just use gently, not to call them out, but to call them into a conversation. Even something as simple as, geez, that word, lots of people find that word really derogatory or mean. What has you used that word? Or what does that mean to you? You can start it as a conversation. And do some listening and then some education. But when you hear mean, intervene at home, at work, and whenever it feels, whenever you can. I have to also say that there's times when it might not be safe to intervene, and so you have to recognize that as well. Now, you may have thought of other do's in this, and I would certainly love to hear them. You can always send me an email at director@ourtruecolors.org. I would love to hear your feedback on other do's that you might have come up with. And here's a few don'ts. Don't use language that assumes orientation. So what does your husband do? What does your wife do? You know, do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a boyfriend? All of those kinds of things assume sexual orientation. I remember, you know, the first few years after I came out, going to, and was in a relationship, going to the gynecologist and having them say, are you sexually active? Why, yes. Oh, what form of birth control are you using? And be like, I don't know, baby, lesbianism, right? Now I'm a cheeky brat, right? And I'm a lesbian for a living. So I have some skills around that, but imagine being 14 years old and just coming out to yourself, or 15 years old. And the first thing that somebody assumes, you know, a doctor, somebody that's paid to take care of you assumes something about your orientation. You have to have the strength to be able to tell them the truth. You know, and for some people, you have to be able to disabuse them of an assumption that they made. And it's scary for people to do that. You know, I don't think I came out to a gynecologist until I was in my mid-30s, because if you're coming at me with a speculum and you don't like gay people, that doesn't feel safe to me, right? So, you know, consider that, and don't make people have to disabuse you of an assumption that you've made. Don't ask questions about people's bodies, right? Like, this is something that I think is really important, that people who don't know or don't have any experience around trans or non-binary folks, you know, may have a lot of curiosity about, you know, different things, the medical interventions that are available to people. But just because we have a curiosity doesn't mean we have the right to have that curiosity satisfied, right? So just don't do it. Don't do it. Somebody once said, I thought this is great, if you're not going to bed with me tonight, none of your business. Don't use slang or derogatory terms. Err on the side of caution. You know, it's interesting, the word queer is one of those interesting words that for some people, that is clearly their identity, that they identify as queer. For some people, queer is a word that is very offensive, that grew up as a word that, you know, was used to hurt them. And so in public settings, I try to not use words that require a context. So if you have to contextualize something, so it's okay for someone to say it, but not for somebody else to say it, or you have to say something like, no, queer is what they use, like they call themselves that, that can reconsider that in a public space. Because if you don't have the opportunity to put the context in, then you're setting up the situation where people can be hurt or offended, and you might not realize that. And I would say the last thing on the don'ts, and you may have additional don'ts that you can email to me, the last thing that I put on the don'ts is don't assume that an individual's LGBTQ plus identity is the only one that matters, right? We're all made up of all the different parts of ourselves. We are racial beings, we are ethnic beings, we are gendered beings, we have language, we have geography, we have status as citizenship status and documentation. There's all these different parts of our identities that are all part of who we are, and they all matter. And it doesn't, you know, don't assume that the LGBTQ plus portion of somebody is the most important identity or their only identity. There's all these other parts of us that are equally as important. You know, obviously we need to respect all of our identities, but I think I said enough on that. I'm gonna stop beating that horse. Okay, so don't assume that LGBTQ plus is the only identity or the only identity that matters for somebody. So I have just a few more slides. And again, I'm gonna give you some suggestions here, but think up for yourself too, how can you be a human safe zone? So one thing that you can do, so what are the ways that you as an individual can become a human safe zone? These are the three things we're going to talk about. What are the things that your school or agency can do to let you know, to let the LGBTQ community know that you welcome and value them? And how do you make these concepts real in your work? So we're going to start with human safe zone ideas for individuals. So one is to use an ally or, you know, a rainbow flag, a safe zone signal. Now, people that are listening to this are coming from lots of different situations. Some of you might be in a corporation, some of you might be in a congregation, some are in an agency. If you've got name tags, consider, you know, an ally pin or a rainbow sticker, or, you know, if you wear a lanyard, consider putting a rainbow ribbon on the lanyard. Those kinds of things are a nonverbal statement that you've thought about this and that you are somebody that people can talk to. Update your language, right? And we've talked a lot about this, to use non-gendered language, to ask people how they identify and use the words that they're using. Some tips about pronouns. share yours first. That's an important thing, because what you do when you share yours is you open the door and make it possible for somebody else to choose to walk through or not. If you are in a corporation, or even if you're not, just personally, add your pronouns to your email signature. On my email signature, not only does it have my pronouns, but it has a link to a one-page document that says why pronouns matter so much. So if somebody looks at my email and goes like, why did she put her pronouns on that? They can always click on the link and find out about that. If you make a mistake, correct yourself, apologize, and try again. Don't know it? Someone's pronouns, some of this we said already. If you feel like you can't ask, use their name. And you may, again, have a lot more ideas for what you might do as individuals. And again, email them to me. I will add them to my slides. If you're an organization or a congregation or an agency, a school, consider these sort of 3 core concepts. How do people first engage with you? What are the intake forms that you use? What are the forms that people fill out to interact with your agency or organization? It could be an employment form. It could be, a form when you're going to a new church or synagogue. It could be, registering for school. What do your forms look like, and where are the places that you can update the inclusivity of your forms? That, for example, and the forms that we use, we put chosen name first, and then legal name if different. So we prioritize how people want to be addressed rather than what it says on their paperwork. Make sure that your forms have a place for pronouns so that people can put them in there if they want to. Use open-ended demographics. Now, I know that makes it harder for researchers and stuff to fill out forms where people are able to put in the words that they call themselves, but consider that having opportunities for people where appropriate to name themselves racially, in terms of their ethnicity, in their language, their abilities, their sexual orientation, their gender identity. Now, not every form might not be relevant on every form that someone fills out what their sexual orientation is, but if it's a medical form, that's definitely relevant, right? And so how do you put those on there so that people can get the healthcare that they need? Gender is always going to be relevant in the forms that you use. And what options are you giving people for how to fill out the forms? Update your website. Look at your website through the eyes of all the different constituencies that you serve. But in this case, look through the eyes of an LGBTQ+ person. What kind of images exist on your website? Are same-sex and transgender folks reflected anywhere on your materials? Do you have inclusive non-discrimination language? Is it on your website? Is there, and the last slide that I'm going to show you has a bunch of different images that you can consider. And I just downloaded them all for free from the internet. But look at your website and make sure that your website includes all of the people that you serve. And then consider your environment. When people walk into your space, whatever that space is, how do they know that they're welcome there? And it is not enough to say, people say this all the time, well, we support everybody, everybody's welcome here. It doesn't work like that. People that have felt and been marginalized or discriminated against often walk into a new situation expecting that the people they're going to interact with are going to have biases or have a tendency to discriminate until proven otherwise, right? That you err on the side of protecting yourself from other people's biases. So unless someone explicitly is included, they're explicitly excluded. So look at your environment. What's up on your walls? What magazines are in your racks? How do people, do you have gender neutral or all gender bathrooms available for people? What's available that lets LGBTQ+ people know that you've thought about them and that they're welcome here? So I'm sure that there's a lot more, but I'm gonna sort of end the video here. This is really designed as sort of an opening video. It's a place to start and to remember that ally is a verb. So the last 2 slides, consider, and really do consider this. What's next for you? How will you put what you have learned into action immediately? So what are you already doing that you might be able to do more of, right? What additional ways might you be an ally? And then an interesting question that we sometimes stop before we get to this point is, how will you hold yourself accountable? How will you hold yourself to the standard that you're setting of inclusivity? All right, this is my last slide. Everything that's on this slide, I downloaded for free. The one thing that cost $1 is the slide in the middle that says, for every girl, there's a boy. I think that cost me $1. And so I'm gonna leave you here. Remember, 2 core points. Don't have to keep up, just have to keep open. Don't have to understand or even accept. You just have to accept and respect. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.